We've seen that in an if, then, else, if, else conditional structure, once one fork is true, the other forks are ignored. So only one of the processes of the conditional structure will be executed, whether it be one of the true forks or the default fork at the end for the else. However, there are times when you want to have each fork possibly executed and not be exclusive to the other forks. And for that, we use a series of if-then structures, or could be if-then-else structures, depending on your purposes. But in this case, each condition is evaluated and the process executed if true. So condition 1, condition 2, condition 3, and condition 4 in this case could all be true, and we would perform process A, process B, process C, and process D. Let's take a look at how we might use this in a Visual Basic program. I've written a program that has 6 runners and their times, and I want to know who won the race, who had the lowest time in seconds. Now you and I can look at this and go, oh, looks like that's probably Brett S. But how do we make the computer be able to determine that? And yes, the computer did find Brett S had the lowest time. But what if we changed Brett's time to be maybe 2:21? And now who won? Well, now we can see that Alex is the winner. All right, let's change Alex's time. And now we see that Blake T is the winner. Change Blake T's time. And Lynn is now the winner. And if we change Lynn's time, that puts Jerry H across the finish line first. So the computer is comparing those scores and telling us who won. Now we've seen an if, then, else, else structure, but the problem with, as we've seen with an if, else, if structure is once one fork is true, then the other forks are not executed. So if we're comparing Jerry to Alex and saying who's the fastest, well, we can't compare then Pat, Lynn, Brett, and Blake. Here's where we would use a sequential conditional structure to look at each score to the lowest score. Now I will say there's better ways to do this than what I'm going to show you, but we haven't gotten to things like arrays, which can very quickly find the lowest value in a list of values. For now, we're doing it the hard way, using what we already know, which is using conditional structures. Let's take a look at my code. I've set up each of the runner named text boxes as txtracer1, txtracer2, and so forth through txtracer6. And then I have txttime1, txttime2, and txttime6. And my button is named btn find winner. And then I have an output label here called lbl output. Let's take a look at the code for the who won. So I start by creating some variables for time 1, time 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and load time, all as doubles. Remember, these have decimal values. I'm going to set up a value called fastest racer and fastest time as text boxes. These are going to be aliases to the text boxes in our UI. I'm going to set time 1 equal to the text of txt time 1 converted to a double, and do the same thing for times 2 through 6. And I do that just to make it a little bit easier in my code, just to work with the variables rather than the properties. Now if we had only one runner, and that was runner 1, we would say runner 1 won the race. They're the lowest time. It didn't matter what their time is, but they'd be the fastest time. We're going to start with that as our lowest time. So I'm going to set load time equal to time 1. And I'm going to set fastest racer equal to txtracer1, and fastest time equals to time 1. Now the reason I'm doing the fastest racer and fastest time text boxes is I want to highlight the fastest time in green. So I need to know what the text box is. And then we'll get the name from the fastest racer from the text box with the racer's name. Now I want to compare racer 2 to that low time. I'm not necessarily comparing racer 2 to racer 1, I'm comparing it to low time. Now in this case that happens to be racer 1. And if the time 2 is lower than low time, then I'm going to set low time equal to time 2. I'm going to replace that with the new time and set fastest racer and fastest time to that second racer. Now let's compare time 3. Is it lower than low time? Now again, I'm not comparing it to racer 1 or racer 2. I'm comparing it to the low time, which will be either racer 1 or racer 2, but it doesn't matter. Regardless of who had the lowest time in the previous 2 racers, now I'm comparing that against racer 3. And if it's lower, then I set the load time to the time 3 and set the fastest racer and fastest time. Then I continue that with time 4 and comparing that to low time. That could be racer 1, racer 2, or racer 3. Does it matter? But if it's lower than the current lowest time, then we'll set low time equal to it and change the fastest racer and fastest time. And then we do the same thing for time 5 and time 6. Once I've gotten through those sequential structures, now notice those are all if, then, end ifs. Each one of those is going to be tested and execute the code if the Boolean is true. So once I've gotten through all of those, now we can set LBL output.text equal to the winner is, I'm going to get the text of the fastest racer. That fastest racer will point to one of those 6 text boxes, TXT Racer 1, TXT Racer 2, through TXT Racer 6, with a time of, and what was the low time in seconds. Then I'm going to color those 2 text boxes in lime green. Now I did one other thing in my code, and that was any time the racer name changed or the time changed, I'm going to unhighlight all of those 12 text boxes. So I set TXT Racer 1 back color to white, and I set all the others equal to that same back color. The reason I don't set them all to white was if I wanted to use a different color, I only have to change it in this one line of code. All the others will correspond. Just a little trick. And then set the LBL output.text, so the racer will be shown here. So anytime we change a value, I want to clear the results. That's the code. And an example of how we can use sequential if, then, end ifs to make a series of comparisons. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.